This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Instacart is on a mission to have you not leave the couch this basketball season. Because between the pre-game rituals and the post-game interviews, it can be difficult to find time for everything else. So let Instacart take care of your game day snacks or weekly restocks and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Because we hear it's bad luck to be hungry on game day. So download the Instacart app today and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply for 3 orders in 14 days, excludes restaurants.
I can't tell you how often I hear, oh, I'm a little OCD. I like things neat. That's not OCD. I'm Howie Mandel, and I know this because I have OCD. Actual OCD causes relentless unwanted thoughts. What if I did something terrible and forgot? What if I'm a bad person? Why am I thinking this terrible thing? It makes you question absolutely everything, and you'll do anything to feel better. OCD is debilitating, but it's also highly treatable with the right kind of therapy. Regular talk therapy doesn't cut it. OCD needs specialized therapy. That's why I want to tell you about NoCD. NoCD is the world's largest virtual therapy provider for OCD. Their licensed therapists provide specialized therapy virtually, and it's covered by insurance for over 155 million Americans. If you think you might be struggling with OCD, visit nocd.com to schedule a free 15-minute call and learn more. That's nocd.com.
I'm Christy Schreiber, and we're here to discuss books that have changed the world and have changed us.
And I'm Gary Schreiber, and this is the How to Love Lit podcast. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1895, London was abuzz about the new Oscar Wilde production. It was highly anticipated, and it promised to be the crowning work of Oscar Wilde's brilliant and emerging career as a dramatist. It promised to be his 4th West End hit in 3 years, an astonishing achievement. Critics, as well as members of every social class, attended the opening night at St. James Theatre in King Street of The Importance of Being Earnest. The audience was dressed in their evening wear. The venue was prestigious. The evening was a glittering affair. Esteemed manager as well as lead actor George Alexander was playing the role of Jack Worthing and had set a high standard for the cast as well as the production. And so, when the curtain opened, the boxes in the stalls were packed with the highest of society, the prosperous middle class, and even the lower class in the pit, and at the back of the stalls were all in comfortable seats, and the audience was not disappointed. When the curtain closed, the applause was sustained. It was noted by many critics that the applause was as strong from the pit and the gallery as it was from the boxes and the stalls, and the laughter was sustained all over the house from start to finish. The Importance of Being Earnest was a resounding success, and of course, there were many reasons for this. The play was funny. The play made fun of the upper crust of British society without offending it too overtly. It was full of memorable one-liners. It was absurd. One critic congratulated Oscar Wilde on having at last found himself, and another said this: "The author has very adroitly provided fun for people who laugh easily and for people who are more fastidious." On opening night, it appeared nothing could ever top the success of Oscar Wilde, and yet, less than 2 months later, Wilde was arrested. On April 6, his name was removed from the show's program, and the following month the play was forced to close. Wilde was headed off to prison. Of course, as we know today, his play was headed for greatness. It is a staple in almost every high school curriculum. It has been turned into movies and performed all over the planet in over 40 languages. For the next 3 episodes, we will discuss this man and the play. while appearing to be silly and a simple comedy of manners, is really at its heart a very clever piece of satire, an ironic and even paradoxical serious criticism on man's insincerity, hypocrisy, and devotion to form over value.
And of course, Wilde does not hide his intentions. I mean, the title tells you everything he's doing in the play. The play is literally a statement of theme. It's called The Importance of Being Earnest. In other words, the importance of being authentic. Of course, it's a pun because Earnest is also a homonym for the name of the main character. But just in case the pun threw you for a loop, there is, of course, the subtitle. The subtitle says this, a trivial comedy for serious people. Of course, that's a little ambiguous. What does it mean? Is he trying to say something serious in a delightful way and let you will only catch whatever you want to out of this play? Does he mean that people are being serious about trivial things? Could it be ironic? Does he mean this is a serious comedy about trivial people? Understanding the works of Oscar Wilde really isn't a simple thing. I mean, his works are layered the way great art always is. And there's so many ways of reading his work and even understanding him as a person. Something, obviously, in retrospect, we can never, ever really do. But in the preface of the only novel that Wilde ever wrote, he says this, it's the spectator and not life that art really mirrors. Now, at first pass, this statement doesn't make sense either. How could art mirror the person watching it? But he's right, of course. What we see largely tells us more about who we are than what the art is or even who the artist is. And of course, that's what we love about great art. It helps us understand ourselves and our world. But in the case of Oscar Wilde, this idea of things being what they seem, not what they seem, or more than what they seem is pervasive, even in this seemingly absurd, simple, funny play. The play appears to be a comedy of manners, but it isn't really. It appears to be about cynical men, but really they're romantic. It appears to be about nothing more serious than cucumber sandwiches, but actually there is a serious statement about the world deeply embedded in its triviality.
So, Christy, if we take Wilde at his word, wouldn't it mean that we're making it those things and not Wilde?
Oh, and there you go. That's the game he plays with us, and that's why it's so intelligent. The play itself is about subjectivity and what we pretend to be versus who we are, which is the real us. Wilde would say, just as Jack is both Jack and Earnest, it is us seeing ourselves and seeing what Wilde creates for us. Subjectivity is the point. We are both who we project to be and also who we hide. And of course, as we look at the life of Wilde, no one knew this better than he did.
Well, let me ask you this. If art really is about the spectator or the audience, would Wilde want us to let his life inform how we understand his work?
Paradoxically, again, I think the answer is yes. Because no one was more performative than Oscar Wilde during his lifetime. He played the press better than anyone. He hired a publicist to go with him when he went on a speaking tour in America. He wrote interviews with himself where he asked and answered his own questions. He dressed in ways that made him stand out. He also wrote a 100-page piece, which today we call De Profundus, which in some ways he meant to explain his work in the context of life. And this was at the very end, although it doesn't really fully do that. So there is that. But I think what Wilde would want us to understand is that we are all more than just one thing. He was Irish, but he wasn't only Irish. He was gay or bisexual, but he certainly was more than his sexuality. He was an aesthetic, but he also wrote satire. Religion played a role in his life, but he certainly expressed spiritual conflicts. His family played a role. His education played a role. We are all more than one thing. And sometimes we are made up of things that live in conflict inside of us. And in this way, the work of an artist reveals different things to different people. And in my case, maybe different things to the same person at different points in your life.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going in circles already.
Well, let's be straightforward. In this episode, we'll discuss Wilde's life, the circumstances of his very famous arrest, and of course, the personal tragedy that played out in regard to his arrest. We will begin the play and read a few lines in the beginning in order just to kind of understand the tone, the mock serious nature of the lines, the epigrams, and so forth. Next episode, we'll talk about the differences between paradox and irony and how Wilde uses these to create humor, but also to discuss serious things. And of course, in the final episode, we'll discuss the ridiculous finale of the play. There's a literary explanation for you.
All right. So let's begin with his birth. He was born Oscar Fennell O'Flaherty Wills Wilde in Dublin, Ireland on October 16th, 1854.
And the first question is, why 3 middle names?
Actually, that was a common practice during that time period. And it was done to honor relatives and things like that. And in his case, his family was well-to-do. His father, William Wilde, was a prominent surgeon and had his own clinic and hospital. William Wilde's textbook, Oral Surgery, was a standard textbook for many years. And William was famous not only for being a surgeon, but also for his interest in archaeology, and he contributed greatly in helping catalog an enormous collection of antiquities in the Museum of the Royal Irish Academy. And professionally, he was so well respected during his day that he was knighted in 1864.
Well, you make him sound really good, but of course, for all of his professional success, I want to bring up that he was also famous for other things. I mean, for his extramarital affairs, for his illegitimate children, one of which was such a scandal, it went to trial in 1864, where he was accused and convicted of drugging and raping a girl by the name of Mary Travers, whose father was a professor at Trinity. So there is that.
Oh, yes. I mean, there is no doubt that Sir William very much had two sides to him, and there's a lot, both positive and negative, that can be read about him, and the negative can be very negative. But Oscar's mother was also a complicated person. She was a writer, an Irish nationalist who wrote revolutionary articles under the pen name John Fanshawe Ellis. And Lady Wilde's stories, and especially her Irish tales, are notable even to this day. And yet she also had a dark side. It turns out that she's been described in the literature as being depressed. She's been called troubled, especially because of her husband's public philandering. She lost a child, which affected her mental health severely. And, I've even read some accounts that she may have actually been diagnosed as what we would call narcissistic personality disorder. Most biographers believe that when Oscar was born, she had so deeply wanted a girl that she dressed him up as a girl for years, well beyond when it might have been considered comfortable for a little one to be dressed like that, even for the Victorian age. And there are pictures of Wilde dressed up in rich embroidered dresses as late as age 5. So if you wanted to get into the psychology of his childhood drama and trauma, there's a lot that a person could speculate on in regard to his early years.
Yeah, another point of interest about Wilde's early years is that he stood out academically. I mean, this is from the start. In 1889, he reflected on this, and this is what he said. I was looked upon as a prodigy by my associates because, quite frankly, I would, for a water, read a 3-volume novel in half an hour so closely as to be able to give an accurate resume of the plot of the story. By 1 hour's reading, I was enabled to give a fair narrative of the incidental scenes and the most pertinent dialogue.
and so humble about it in retrospect. And I think it's funny in light of the play that he brings up this 3-volume novel because it's a joke in the play. As a trend people were obsessed about at that time. He also seems to be a slightly personal joke as well.
Yeah, there is a lot of these personal jokes going on in his works. But speaking on Wilde's humility, I'm not sure anyone ever accused Oscar Wilde of being too humble.
He would have taken it as an insult, I'm sure. But to his credit, there's no doubt that he distinguished himself as a student. And he won a scholarship to Trinity. And while he was there, he won the prestigious Berkeley Gold Medal in Greek. And from there, he took the exams to get into Oxford and achieved the highest marks on his entrance exams of anyone in his entire group. At Oxford, he did well, becoming well known for his wit. At one point, he proclaimed, because he wasn't an athlete, that the only possible exercise is to talk, not to walk.
And his success didn't even stop at Oxford. I mean, he set out to become a poet and very quickly became popular on the London social scene. He was funny. He was flamboyant. He attracted a lot of attention. He would go to parties and hold court. That's what we would call it today. In fact, by June of 1881, the Prince of Wales commented, "I do not know Mr. Wilde, and not to know Mr. Wilde is not to be known."
Not to be known, okay? Really, what he's doing is marketing himself. It's the same thing celebrities who want to earn a living as influencers do today on social media. Wilde intuitively knew he needed to leverage his personality and intellect into something that he could monetize, and he did do that. One example being his speaking tour in the United States in 1882. It was highly successful, and he made lots of money crossing America for 11 months, giving 141 what he called lectures. But they were funny, so today we might really consider them to be comedian monologues.
Well, when he arrived in America, he famously told the New York customs officer right there at the beginning, "I have nothing to declare but my genius."
Well, there is no doubt if he were alive today, he would have had his own Netflix special.
I think so.
But he spent too much. And so even after making all that money, he was always in debt. The bottom line is Oscar Wilde liked nice things, and he just bought them.
Yes, he did. And he did that even when he was a broke college student. Another really famous Oscar Wilde line that you'll see from time to time, it's from his college days. And he said this, "I find it harder and harder every day to live up to my blue china." And what he means, blue china is symbolizing there this refined taste that he kept having. He had this refined lifestyle. He enjoyed beautiful things. He insisted on having them. And he really couldn't afford them. So in what may have been an attempt to find financial stability to accommodate his lavish spending, after the America trip, he returned and became engaged to a woman by the name of Constance Lloyd.
Is the consensus that he married her for money?
Yeah, that's a good question because she did have money. So there is that. And I've wondered that myself. There's also this idea that he married her to cover up his homosexuality. And that might have been part of it too. But there is also a lot of evidence to suggest that they did love each other. And he cared for her. She cared for him. They married quickly and then had kids, 2 kids very quickly, Cyril in 1885 and Vivian the next year. So on paper, at this point, he's settling down. He became the editor of a women's magazine for a year, and he wrote stories and he published essays. And in 1890, he published the only novel he would ever write, The Picture of Dorian Gray, which of course brought him notoriety for its implied immorality. He knew it would, though, and he preempted the accusation by prefacing the entire book with another famous epigram. "There is no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are, let me read it correctly, books are well written or badly written. That is all." So that's what he put.
Well, I assume his readership found that claim arguable.
Oh, yes, and people have been arguing about it ever since. Is it true? Is it not? But in his case, not longer after that book came out, he achieved the professional success in London that he wanted. His first successful play was in 1892. Then he wrote 3 more before that fateful production of The Importance of Being Earnest. So all of this on the surface was just one success after another. Oscar Wilde was untouchable, just like his father, until it came crashing down, and it did. By 1895, he was convicted of gross indecency and sentenced to the maximum sentence of 2 years of hard labor. But of course, it's worse than that. He was vilified in the press. He was called a monster and a scourge of humanity. The judge said this to him before pronouncing his sentence, and I want to read the judge's exact words. "The crime of which you have been convicted is so bad that one has to put stern restraint upon oneself to prevent oneself from describing in language I would rather not use the sentiments which must rise to the breast of every man of honor who has heard the details of these 2 terrible trials. People who can do these things must be dead to all sense of shame. It is the worst case I have ever tried, and you, Wilde, have been the center of a circle of extensive corruption of the most hideous kind among young men, is equally impossible to doubt."
Wow. Those were and are harsh, and the shame and humiliation he would experience was emotionally devastating. I want also to point out that prison in this time period was no easy thing. He had a wooden bed with no mattress, a tin pot for a toilet. He was compelled to walk on a treadmill for 6 hours a day and forced to make postal bags. The smell of prison was vile. He was confined for months at a time to solitary confinement. In September of 1895, his wife was allowed to visit, and she described his condition as awful, more so than any conception of it could be.
You know, and if you read De Profundus, the work he wrote, during his prison time, he expresses being just completely broken. I mean, De Profundus is long, but it's really a compelling essay, and it's easy to read. He talks about having it all, then losing it all. He talks about living a life totally dedicated to the pursuit of pleasure, to all of a sudden experiencing extreme physical, mental, and emotional suffering and humiliation. He talks about accepting all parts of himself. And he talks about wanting to commit suicide at one point and wanting to create art about suffering and sorrow. I'll read just a couple of quotes so you can get the gist of it, but it's really compelling. He says this: "With us, prison makes man a pariah. I, and such as I am, have hardly any right to air and sun. Our presence taints the pleasure of others. We are unwelcome when we reappear. To revisit the glimpses of the moon is not for us. Our very children are taken away. Those lovely links with humanity are broken. We are doomed to be solitary while our sons still live. We are denied the one thing that might bring balm to the bruised heart and peace to the soul in pain. I must say to myself that I ruined myself, and that nobody, great or small, can be ruined except by his own hand. I am quite ready to say this so. I am trying to say so, though they may think so that they may not think it at the present moment. This pitiless indictment I bring without pity against myself. Terrible as was what the world did to me, what I did to myself, far more terrible still. I was a man who stood in symbolic relations to the art and culture of my age. I had realized this for myself at the very dawn of my manhood, and had forced my age to realize it afterwards. Few men hold such a position in their own lifetime and have it so acknowledged."
I want to point out that throughout Wilde's prison sentence, Constance stood by him, and she said she didn't consider him a wicked man. She considered him a weak one. And she did eventually change her last name back to her maiden name and cut him off from his parental rights after he refused to give up his relationship with Lord Douglas and after his release from prison. And also, sadly, she was diagnosed with spinal paralysis and died after a back operation not too long after her ex-husband's release from prison. And he never saw his children since his incarceration at his time, and they were 8 and 9 years old, respectively.
To quote Wilde's definition of fiction out of Earnest, the good end happily and the bad unhappily. From the perspective of history, his life story is, by that definition, nonfiction. And it doesn't redeem itself, not even after his release from prison. I mean, he tried to enter a Roman Catholic retreat for 6 months. He was refused entry, and this broke his heart. He left for France and assumed the alias Sebastian Melmoth. He lived only about 3.5 years after his release from prison, and he wrote really very little. He deteriorated in isolation. He drank heavily. He overate. His mental health never recovered. In the fall of 1900, he developed an ear infection. It got complicated. This led to a surgery. He got sepsis, and he died at the age of 46.
Well, the incarceration of Oscar Wilde had less to do with his personal story than it did with a political moment in history where he got caught up in a firestorm. And there is a way of understanding Oscar Wilde's persecution as somewhat inevitable. And he in some ways became a martyr of a political frenzy.
Of course, I don't want to condone anything pertaining to Wilde's marriage or his extramarital sexual activity, but it is important and certainly interesting to understand what exactly was behind this strange twist of fortune. So, Gary, by way of explanation, can you talk to us a little bit about the political history of what was going on at this moment that caused Britain's shining artistic star to be on top of the world one moment and then its greatest shame the very next?
Oh, you want to talk politics of Victorian England?
Yes.
Said no one ever. Sure. At the end of the 19th century, Britain was deeply divided as a nation, and sexuality, not just homosexuality, but sexuality in general, became the battleground for a larger cultural conflict. People were afraid of the breakdown of moral and social disciplines in general, and the resulting breakdown of society at large. And because of this fear of moral decline, as a practical result, there were many people who fiercely professed very traditional standards of behaviors, but were actually living a totally different reality. This is exactly what we see Wilde making fun of in the play, in The Importance of Being Earnest. And its wholehearted acceptance and resounding applause at every point affirms that this was a common problem and a common observation. And of course, although Wilde makes lighthearted fun of this obvious reality, the situation was actually very serious. In the 1860s, the British government passed a series of contagious disease acts which allowed authorities to order any woman suspected of being a prostitute to be tested for venereal disease. And in theory, this law was designed to protect the armed forces, but advocates for women found it outrageous and a complete double standard. Many saw prostitutes not as criminals, but as victims of urban poverty and rape, and among other circumstances, and often crimes perpetuated by men.
Well, of course, this is a problem many British and other European writers had been talking about in novels for years. I mean, think about Les Mis by Victor Hugo. That's the first one that comes to my mind. But, Thomas Hardy, George Eliot, Jonathan Swift, a lot of these people were talking about this problem.
Exactly. And there was a huge backlash to what was considered governmental overreach. And by 1886, the Contagious Disease Act had been repealed. And in the process, a movement emerged called the Social Purity Alliance, with hundreds of agencies and alliances all over the nation. And the main purpose of this movement was to curtail the victimization of women, prostitution, as well as what they called the white slave trade, or what we today would call sex trafficking. However, as time went by, this movement, originally created to support women, expanded the scope of what it wanted to do, and ultimately arriving in 1885 at the now infamous Criminal Amendment Act. And this law passed by the British Parliament was intended to crack down on prostitution and the sex trafficking of women, and it did do just that in many ways. And it raised the age of consent from 13 to 16, made it illegal to procure an attempt to procure any girl under 21 for unlawful sexual activity. It made it illegal to procure any woman to become a prostitute. It made it illegal to recruit a woman to leave the UK to work in a brothel. However, there was an infamous amendment that was added to this act called the Labusher Amendment, and this amendment was controversial. This amendment stated that any male person who in public or private commits or is a party to the commission of or procures or attempts to procure the commission by any male person of any act of gross indecency with another male person would be punished by up to 2 years in prison.
Well, my first thought is that all these provisions that pertain to women are very specific, but that provision that addresses the behavior of men is very vague. It's for a description of a crime. Exactly.
It is specifying and criminalizing in the vaguest of terms private as well as public acts of consenting adults. And Henry Labusher proposed the amendment, and looking back, some people believe he introduced the controversial amendment to sabotage the bill at large because he was against this bill. He was against the Criminal Law Amendment Act. We know for a fact that he was skeptical of the existence of white slave trade, and he hated the Purity campaign in general. Whatever the intent, no one could have foreseen that for the next 80 years, thousands of men would be rounded up and imprisoned over private behaviors all over the UK. And the Criminal Amendment Act was drawn up hastily. It was passed late at night with no debate to a near-empty House of Commons. And after it was passed, it became very difficult to attack it because you would immediately be portrayed in the press as being for the prostitution of women and the trafficking of children, because that was the bulk of the law.
So this is where Oscar Wilde's story all of a sudden becomes the fodder of debate in a politically divided country. I mean, in 1889, 4 years after this controversial law passes, there's an incident, and it started with the report of a theft. Money had been stolen out of a post office on Cleveland Street in London. No big deal, right? However, during the investigation of the burglary, investigators uncover a sex scandal. The post office messenger boys were being used as prostitutes working at a nearby brothel. which the brothel catered to primarily rich, well-connected political men, some even royal. The investigation hit the news. Everyone was watching. Homosexuality was a vice of the rich who preyed on the poor. That was the narrative. And because the perpetrators were rich, well-connected political men, most were not prosecuted, and even those who pled guilty got off without anything, or at the most very, very light sentences. The proprietor of the brothel was convicted, but he was allowed time to flee the country. The highest-ranking person suspected to be involved was none other than Prince Albert Victor, the Duke of Clarence, heir of Prince of Wales, second in line to the throne. That's how high up this goes. This was scandalous. Britain was outraged not only by the fact that young boys were being prostituted and that high-ranking, socially respectable men were involved, but that after the exposure, nothing was done. Middle-class Britain was angry. They were ready to convict someone rich and famous. And here comes Oscar Wilde, a popular, well-connected, rich young man.
But of course, his situation was nothing at all like the Cleveland Street brothel, however. But a frenzy was starting. Nobody cared, especially not a judge wanting to appear tough on crime and tough on the rich upper class.
Correct. But ironically, Oscar Wilde was not the richest or the most well-connected person in his story. I mean, his romantic partner was, and that was his problem. Oscar Wilde was involved in a sexual relationship with a man named Lord Alfred Douglas. Lord Alfred Douglas's father was the Marquess of Queensberry. Well, Queensberry was furious already with his son's behavior, and he wanted to end the relationship between his son and Wilde. In fact, he tried to crash the opening of The Importance of Being in Earnest, and he barged into this private club one night where Oscar Wilde was a member. It was called the Albemarle Club. When the club refused to let him in, he left a card, and he wrote on it, and it's really kind of famous, "For Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite." He meant to write sodomite, but he completely misspelled it. Queensberry, for all of his anger, was not a very good speller. But anyway, 10 days after this card incident, somebody gave Wilde the card, and Wilde asked Douglas, "What should I do about your dad?" Douglas hated his father, and he talked Wilde into suing Queensberry for libel. He wanted Wilde to claim that Queensberry was trying to destroy his reputation and his career. Now, of course, Douglas nor Wilde believed that Douglas's father could prove anything, especially not in a courtroom. That calculation turned out to be wrong. Queensberry could prove something. He had hired investigators, and he had collected quite a bit of evidence. Wilde lost the libel case against Queensberry, but that's not the worst. Because of all this evidence that had been admitted to court over the course of this trial, Wilde was arrested. He was denied bail, and worse than that, his creditors came in and called his debts. He's in jail. He couldn't pay his debts. He couldn't earn money to pay. He quickly went bankrupt. All of his belongings were sold at auction. After 2 trials, Justice Sir Alfred Wills, not only wanting to not appear weak, ordered the harshest sentence the law would allow for the crime that was to be called gross indecency.
So what happened to his partner, Lord Alfred Douglas, Queensberry's son?
Well, as you know, nothing. Douglas was protected. Queensberry's evidence of Wilde was with other partners, not his son. This trial and Wilde's incarceration, they've overshadowed completely Oscar Wilde's career in many ways. Today, when people hear the name of Oscar Wilde, they think of it very one-dimensionally. They think he's this playwright I know something about because he got in trouble for being gay, and that's all we know.
And yet what I find so interesting is that his personal story totally explains the creative and nuanced perspectives that makes his work more than just a comment on British upper-class Victorian salon life. I mean, it makes it more serious, even the playful pieces.
Well, I think so, too. I mean, Wilde's work speaks to this important idea of appearance versus reality. He's interested in all of his work in this idea of who we are as true, authentic people. And the answer is complex. We are one way, we present ourselves to be another, but we're both things. That's how Wilde views the world. I mean, look at the title, The Importance of Being Earnest. Wilde is challenging the division between what is true and what is a lie, what is a person's presenting self and a person's real self, between reality and fiction. But he doesn't claim it's an either or.
You know, he doesn't see this as a simple thing. And even though this play is funny, it's light, it's exaggerated in almost every way. And he's also showing how complex this relationship actually is. And in fact, how complex relationships between all of us actually are. I mean, what part of us is a performance and, what part of us isn't? And why do we perform? And what's the point of it?
Correct. And he can do it and be funny. I mean, we call this Horatian satire. I mean, through humor, Wilde makes it okay to look at really what can be some more uncomfortable parts of personality and society. And we can laugh at ourselves instead of judge each other.
Of course, we also understand as we watch the play that we are certainly not like these ridiculous characters in a play, but we know people who are like these ridiculous characters.
Correct. It's always the other guy he's making fun of.
It's not about me.
Oh, no. I mean, the play challenges many ideas of socially constructed gender and social norms. And if you think this play is about nothing, which is what a lot of people think, watch it again. Be careful. You might be the butt of the joke.
And so, with that, we should jump in and introduce a few lines of the play.
All right, but I want to reserve the right to interrupt because there's lots of good things to say.
I think that goes without saying, don't you always?
Oh, and that, of course, is something Wilde would, in a humorous, accusatory way, suggest that I'm always butting into all kinds of things.
And do you?
Of course I don't, but I should. The world would be better if I butted in more.
Okay, now you're trying to sound like Wilde. So the first scene opens up in what is described as Algernon's flat, or as we would say, his apartment. The servant Lane is setting out tea. Christy, there is almost nothing in this play but people sitting around having tea. Since tea comes around at every point, I have to assume, as an amateur student of literature, that it is a motif and possibly a symbol. I mean, do we want to go there already?
Absolutely. But first, let's describe what they mean by having tea. Tea is not just a drink. I mean, we live in the American South, and every restaurant in this area serves what we call sweet tea, a glass of brewed tea full of ice and lots of sugar. I mean, lots of people drink sweet tea with every meal. My mother and grandmother drank sweet tea almost with every meal. But that's not what we're talking about. My daughters and I were in London not too long ago, and one of the things that we wanted to do, and we did do, is we had afternoon tea at the famous Fortnum and Mason. We didn't go in just to drink something. We had what I think is essentially a full meal. I mean, English tea is a big deal. So tell us a little bit about it.
Well, originally, most English tea came from the East, specifically China. Catherine of Braganza, wife of King Charles II, brought the tradition already popular in her native Portugal to England, and it took off. At first, it was a pastime only for the wealthy, but over time, all of Britain was drinking tea. Eventually, the English became known for it, even if it wasn't originally native to the UK. And they drink it hot and with milk and sugar, which is different from the way that we drink it in the American South. But what we're talking about in the importance of being earnest is not just drinking tea, but of afternoon tea. That tradition was introduced in the mid-1800s, closer to Wilde's day. It was, and still is, a very fashionable social event. And during the 1880s, the upper class would change into long gowns and gloves and hats for their afternoon tea, which happened in the afternoon. And traditional tea would consist of dainty sandwiches, most famously cucumber sandwiches, but also scones served with clotted cream and jam, cakes and pastries, and usually served from a teapot into a delicate china cup, not a mug with a tea bag like you may see in the hand of your classroom teacher. With a bag hanging out of a Stanley mug would be vulgar for those terms.
Exactly. And with that in mind, we must enter Wilde's world of satire. Remember, as we've talked before in other episodes on Jonathan Swift or about other satire writers, when an author creates a piece of satire, humor is a vehicle for saying something serious. So if we think that this play is satire and not just parody, we are admitting by definition that Wilde is saying something serious. He's not just being funny. Funny is a tool for addressing what the author considers to be a concern. And what could possibly be serious about this play? Well, let's read the first lines of the play as well as the stage directions. I'll play Lane, the servant, if you'll play Algernon.
Sounds good. I'll do my best English impression.
Oh, dear.
I'll start. Did you hear what I was playing, Lane?
I didn't think it polite to listen, sir.
I'm sorry for that. For your sake. I don't play accurately. Anyone can play accurately, but I play with wonderful expression. As far as the piano is concerned, sentiment is my forte. I keep science for life.
Yes, sir.
And speaking of the science of life, have you got the cucumber sandwiches cut for Lady Braracknel?
Yes, sir.
Oh, by the way, Lane, I see from your book that on Thursday night, when Lord Shoreham and Mr. Worthing were dining with me, 8 bottles of champagne were entered as having been consumed.
Yes, sir. 8 bottles and a pint.
Why is it that at a bachelor's establishment, the servants invariably drink the champagne? I ask merely for information.
I attribute it to the superior quality of the wine, sir. I have often observed that in married households, the champagne is rarely of a first-rate brand.
Good heavens, is marriage so demoralizing as that?
I believe it is a very pleasant state, sir. I have had very little experience of it with myself to the present. I've only been married once. That was in consequence of a misunderstanding between myself and a young person.
I don't know that I'm much interested in your family life, Lane. So let me interrupt. If you're watching this as a play, which is the way it's intended to be presented, this is a very rapid-fire, back-and-forth banter, and it's very nonsensical.
Exactly. And one of the early criticisms of the play, in fact, of this very first performance, was that the play felt like that every character was Oscar Wilde. I mean, all the lines sound like something he would have said personally. Wilde was known as being funny and witty, as being full of one-liners and being sassy and for reversing things. And every character in this play does this. I mean, it's very purposeful, it's very artificial, and that's exactly the point. So let me show what I mean. For example, Algernon keeps science for life. Well, the common phrase of the day was a man who lives a life of science. Wilde is mocking this. One of Oscar Wilde's points is exactly that, polite society, in this case, English society. But this applies to the whole world. Everything is scripted, everything is artificial, and oftentimes everything is a flat-out reversal. But let's look at a few of the other funny little criticisms he makes. Algernon basically accuses the servants of drinking his expensive champagne. Lane doesn't even bother to deny it. We see this a little later when, after Algernon eats an entire plate of cucumber sandwiches before Lady Braracknel gets there for tea, he again blames Lane for not having any sandwiches. But in both cases, Lane just rolls with it. Lane knows as well as Algernon who the guilty party really is, and it isn't Lane, but it doesn't matter. The servant will just take the blame because that's how society works.
Well, it's also very interesting how Algernon very cavalierly admits to knowing nothing about his servant's life or even cares to, and Lane just rolls with that too. I mean, it's the order of things. There's no sentimentality. Everyone is playing their part. But Lane also knows how to navigate this world. And when Algernon asks Lane if he's been listening to him play the piano, Lane, in the politest way possible, says he's ignoring him. I mean, what else could the phrase, I don't think it polite to listen, what could that possibly mean? You know, this play is about role-playing and masking intent politeness. It's about not saying what you mean, but getting what you want in a world where everything is pretend. And you know how I feel about the British doing this, how it drives me crazy.
Everybody does it. And of course, knowing a little bit about Wilde's personal story gives us a little insight into how he became so cynical about the cultural constructs of his day, not least of which is marriage. I mean, this entire play, we just saw one, is full of one-liners attacking the institution of marriage. I mean, the rhetorical term for a one-liner, by the way, is an epigram, and all of the characters get some. They're funny, but at the same time, they're going to condemn all of us of falseness, deceit, hypocrisy, playing each other to get what we want. Remember, almost always, authors give away their theme in the first few lines of their work. And right after this back and forth with Lane comes in this character that we will call Jack, but also goes by Earnest. Earnest, by the way, as a proper name, is not spelled the same way as the word that means to be sincere. Earnest, as the title of the play, is spelled E-A-R-N-E-S-T, but as a name, it's played without the A, E-R-N-E-S-T. Wilde uses both spellings, and that's how he creates his pun. This guy, Jack, who who goes by the name of Earnest, Ernest without the A, is not sincere. He's not honest. Earnest is not earnest. Does that make sense?
Totally not. That's confusing. But yeah, we'll just roll with it.
Yeah, and we learned this because Algernon has a cigarette case that belongs to Jack or Earnest, however we want to call him. Algernon asks Lane to bring in the cigarette case. Lane brings it in on a platter. Of course, as an audience member, this is a very interesting thing. I mean, it's a prop. Why are we making a big deal about a cigarette case? It's not usual to bring a cigarette case in an opening scene of a play, certainly not on a platter, so it must be important. And it is. After a very long and witty conversation about this cigarette case, we learn that this character, Jack, has a habit of leaving his home in the country to come to town, presumably to take care of his brother named Earnest, who is always getting into trouble. However, there is no brother. Earnest is an excuse for Jack to come to London to party. In London, he goes by the name of Earnest. Algernon calls this practice bunburying. And what we learn is that all the characters in the play bunbury in one way or another. They all pretend. In Algernon's case, he has invented a bedridden person named Bunbury. Whenever Algernon wants to get out of a social obligation, he tells people that he has to go take care of the invalid Bunbury.
You know, one of the first critics of Wilde's performance said this about the characters in this play. Mr. Wilde's people would be monsters had they not thousands a year, by thousands he means thousands of pounds, handles to their names, by that he means family lineage, grandiosium butlers and dresses from the Rue de la Paix. In other words, they lived very fancy lives. These characters are constructed to be callous and self-centered, and yet when audiences watch the play, they laugh. They know that they are just as guilty of making fake excuses to get out of social engagements. And they too have exploited brothers and children and elderly relatives, and any excuse will do. And we laugh because we see ourselves. We also are callous and self-centered and totally willing to lead double lives to get what we want.
Correct, which brings me to another motif in the play, the food. Notice how much food is consumed in this play, especially by Algernon. Food in this play is ravenously consumed in front of the other characters as well as in front of the audience, which is kind of weird for a play. It's funny for sure, but I'm not sure I know of almost any other play where the actors have to eat so much on stage. The play starts with Algie eating, then they eat through the second act. Act 3 opens with Cecily commenting that Algie and Jack are eating muffins.
So what's the point of all that?
That is the rhetorical question that Oscar Wilde asks his audience. What is the point of so much consumption? One thing that makes this play work is that it employs a satirical technique we call bathos. Bathos is when the characters on stage are being very serious and horribly ridiculous, but they take it very seriously, and that's what makes it funny. This play wouldn't work if these characters were not very serious about everything that they're doing. They're serious about bumbering. They're serious about cucumber sandwiches. And we will see that they're very serious about handbags found in railway stations with babies inside. Wilde asks his audience the question, what is the point of all the play acting that we do? At this point in his career, he may foolishly believe that he is above all that.
Well, one of the big inside jokes of the original performance of this play may have been that cigarette case. During Wilde's trials for gross indecency, one of the most damning pieces of evidence were various silver engraved cigarette cases that witnesses presented to the court, admitting in court that they were gifts from Wilde given to them in exchange for sex.
Well, that audacious inside joke got turned on its head. I mean, he was presented with his own cigarette case on a platter.
Exactly, but he didn't take it seriously enough, and his friends, his attorney, and even his wife advised him to flee the country before they put him behind bars, but he didn't. He stayed. The magistrate, who was somewhat sympathetic to this celebrity convict, made a point of delaying issuing the warrant for his arrest until 5 p.m. for the express purpose of allowing Wilde to catch the train boat to France. And Wilde didn't go. He boldly waited for them to come and arrest him.
And he wasn't a stupid person. Why do you think he did that?
I don't know. Obviously, later in life, he claimed he couldn't face the status of being hunted, and that may be true. Maybe he believed he could be acquitted. Maybe he didn't believe the rules really applied to him. He certainly knew of an awful lot of famous and rich people living lifestyles very similar to his who weren't getting in trouble. Who knows why he did what he did. But during the same conversation from Act 1 with Jack, Algernon says this: "The truth is rarely pure and never simple." And that, of course, is very true for all of us, and it certainly applies to the life of Oscar Wilde.
Yes, the truth of his life was not pure and certainly not simple. In real life, he was known to be charming, to be fun, to bring a lot of life and wit wherever he went. However, on the other side, he was convicted on evidence from male prostitutes who were likely underage. And even though it's true that perhaps he was a scapegoat for a society that had let too many gentlemen off the hook for doing similar things, it's also true that he too was guilty, and he admits as much in De Profundus at the end of his life.
Do you think for some people knowing the backstory of this play could hurt their enjoyment of it? I mean, are we to judge or not judge him?
And therein lies the question. Later in Act 1, Lady Braracknel, who's my favorite character, and in fact the woman I aspire to be when I grow up, she says this: "Ignorance is like a delicate exotic fruit. Touch it and the bloom is gone." And that's of course true. Not knowing something or indulging in a beautiful fantasy looks good. Touching the fantasy with the truth disturbs it. Looking at the harsh realities of our own hypocrisy, our own self-serving blundering, it can wreck it. But that exactly is what makes this play interesting. We are forced to disturb the fantasy of the falseness of our world, but because the characters are silly, the lines are funny, the costumes are beautiful, and everyone is eating, we can swallow the truth and smile while doing it.
And so there you have it, the introduction to the upside-down, playful world of Oscar Wilde and the importance of being earnest. In the next episode, we will discuss how he achieves these interesting effects and analyze a little more of the paradoxes and the ironies that make this lovable play not just a comedy for the 19th century, but a comedy for all time. As always, thanks for being with us. Check us out on our Facebook page, on our other social media. Check us out on howtolovelitpodcast.com. And thank you for helping us in our goal to make literature accessible to as many people as possible.
Peace out.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Smart shoppers know where to find real value. At the Jeff Wyler Columbus Auto Mall, you'll find 5 brand new models under $30,000, over 600 used vehicles under $20,000, new vehicles priced under employee pricing, and a team that gives you top dollar for your trade every time. Shop smart at Jeff Wyler on Gender Road or JeffWylerColumbusAutomall.com.
Live from the internet's red carpet, it's Vrbo's 2025 Vacation Rentals of the Year. Our annual showcase of the very best of Vrbo. Selected from over 2 million private vacation rentals, this year's list features breakout hits like a ski-in, ski-out mountain chalet and a modern beach compound with unobstructed ocean views. And with discounts on select stays of 1 week or longer, these critically acclaimed homes might be more affordable than you'd think. Head over to Vrbo.com, that's VRBO, to check out the official list and make it a Vrbo.